Welcome to the conference, Mr. Srivastava.
Thank you.
The Consul General just now said that Indian companies are doing well. Here's a company which came here about over 40 years back. So first of all, happy birthday to Maruti Suzuki.
Thank you very much.
Today is the day they came in. So 40 years, give us a perspective where is, I know you produce 4,000 cars a day, or vehicles if I may say so. Can you give us a top view of how Maruti has done? And we still call it Maruti Suzuki, so how do you see the journey? How has the footprint expanded?
Yeah, I think these 40 years have been very fruitful, both from the organization perspective and also for the overall contribution that Maruti Suzuki made to the Indian economy. You know, in the last 40 years, Maruti Suzuki has sold 2.5 crore, that is 25 million vehicles. That's a huge number, and we are very proud of our contribution to the Indian economy. 40 years back, when we partnered with Suzuki, Indian car penetration was just 3 vehicles, 2.4 vehicles per 1,000 people.
I must interrupt you there. Probably most of the youngsters in the audience were not born when Suzuki came to India, and a lot of them wouldn't know that the choice between cars in those days was between a Premier Padmini and an Ambassador, and the choice of color was black or white, and then came this little red car and sort of drove Indians crazy. So now how many models do you make? What is the dealership level? What is your footprint like?
Yeah, so I was just coming to that when we came in, there was just about 2.2 vehicles per 1,000 Indians. Today, it is about 30. And when you compare it with developed countries, which is about 700 plus, I think there is a huge upside. India became the 3rd largest passenger vehicle production country in the world in 2022. We just went ahead of Japan, who are now number 4. But we are very proud that Suzuki has helped us in attaining this milestone for our country. On Maruti Suzuki's footprint, we have about 3,500 showrooms, outlets, about 4,000 plus workshops. We cover 3,000 cities, and you'll be happy that out of the 6.5 lakh villages that are there in India, Maruti Suzuki has been sold in at least one Maruti Suzuki has been sold in 4.5 lakh villages. So that's also really, I believe, is a very big milestone, and we are quite proud of it.
So in a sense, other than the telecom companies, Maruti Suzuki would be the single largest corporate entity with a public-facing footprint across the economy. And you also have a window to the entry level. So how is Maruti Suzuki done in a long-term perspective? I believe that Maruti Suzuki is bigger than Suzuki in India in volume terms and almost as much in value terms. How is that Maruti Suzuki done?
Yeah, so I think the statistics of last year were that we are about 60% by volume for the overall Suzuki Motor Corporation. That also is a great achievement for India. It shows the upswing in the Indian economy. Our demography is very young. 65% of our people are less than 35 years. Japan is a little aging society, and therefore I think in consumption terms, you can expect, and we expect, that the car consumption in India will continue to increase. In fact, our projections are very bullish, almost 6 million by 2030, from the current level of about 3.8 million in 2022.
And in terms of exports, I mean, you know, India is now focusing on Atmanirbhar Bharat, on Make in India. How much is Maruti Suzuki contributing to that effort?
So we have been the number one exporter for cars for the last so many years now. This year also, this financial year, we should be exporting more than 2.5 lakh vehicles. So it's a very important contribution because when we started 40 years back, India had no component manufacturer. Thanks to all the help that we got from Suzuki and the technology that they gave us, we could develop a very good vendor base in India. That helped localization, and that actually has helped not just getting our costs down and building in efficiencies, but has also helped in creating a base for export of components, which is also a very big industry from India. So the localization which happened, the amount of exports that is now possible from the component manufacturers, and also the employment that has been generated is immense. And that's also, I think, points to a very important contribution that auto industry makes to the economy of our country.
So in a sense, what you enabled in the ecosystem, in the larger economy by creating the backward and forward integrations, that has also brought in the ability for a lot of Indian medium and small scale industries to contribute to this, but they are also contributing to the competition nowadays. So there is a perception, ऐसे लगता है कि मारुति थोड़ा सा धुंधला रही है on the Indian road, ज़्यादा किया, क्रिया, क्रेटा ऐसे दिखाई दे रहा है, तो इसको आप कैसे देखते हैं?
देखिए, मैं तो ये समझता हूँ कि कंपटीशन भी अगर अच्छा नया आएगा, हमारे लिए भी अच्छा होता है, क्योंकि हम अपने को बेहतर कर सकते हैं, अपनी एफिशिएंसी बढ़ा सकते हैं, हम प्रोडक्टिविटी की तरफ ध्यान देंगे, हम अपने कॉस्ट स्ट्रक्चर की तरफ ध्यान देंगे. कंपटीशन ऑलवेज हेल्प्स everyone, not just the consumer alone, but for established companies like Maruti Suzuki, because we then want to be better. And that, I think, the attitude of trying to be better, and that's also something we have learned from Japanese system of Kaizen, which is you have to improve continuously. And competition in one way helps that Kaizen, the desire to improve continuously. And that is why we welcome the competition. I know you are referring to some of the SUVs which are currently being seen.
So what is the Kaizen learning from? There is a perception that maybe on the SUV or the compacts, Suzuki has been a little more reticent or slower off the track. Is that a true picture?
Yeah, you can say that, yes. Because, you know, if you look at the structure, the construct of the Indian auto market, roughly about 60% were hatches. And just 2 years back, about 44-45% were hatches, the small cars. Today, there is just 35%. The biggest segment today is SUV, which is about 45% of the market. So yes, you are right. The SUVs, which were just 16% 5 years back, they have gone up to 45%, whereas the hatches have come down from 45 to now 35. So you are right. But one of the big strengths which Suzuki has in its small cars has been reflected in the very good market share that we have in the small car segment. We are almost 70% plus. In vans, we are 90% plus. But when you look at if you remove SUVs, then our market share is actually 65%. But when you combine it with SUV, the market share falls to around 45%. So clearly, we need to strengthen our SUV space. And one of the things which we found out was that the reason for the lower share in the SUV for Maruti is that we had only one vehicle in about 46 brands which are available. Some of them you mentioned from our rivals recently. One vehicle is the Vitara Brezza, the Maruti Suzuki Brezza, which is the market leader in its segment. But one is not enough when you have 46 other. So we decided to bring in new vehicles. We launched the Grand Vitara last year in September. And very recently in the Auto Expo, we unveiled two SUVs, the Fronx and the Jimny. And we believe that with these two vehicles, we should increase our market share. And our target is to achieve 50% market share. That is our stated target. And we believe that if you achieve about 33-34% of the SUV market, then we can be 50% of the overall market. Obviously, it assumes that we keep that 65% in the non-SUV space. And one stated objective, and we are not afraid to say that, we want to be and we should be number one in SUV space in this financial year 23-24. I mean the next financial year 2024.
So this is...
And by the way, just to clear the misconception, in the MUV space, which is SUV and MPV, Maruti Suzuki is even today the number one manufacturer, something which is not understood or not perceived. Remember, because our market share in SUV is now 16%, still very high, I would say, when you look at the competitors, all the names that you gave, who are at that 16-17% only. But when you compare with 65% in the non-SUV, it looks small. So yes, from our standards, it is small, and we will try to increase it definitely.
No, I mean, a lot of people in this audience may have driven a Gypsy. I have been a fortunate owner of a Gypsy and driven it, and it is still considered as the real macho vehicle on Indian roads. And somehow or the other, there's always been a mystery as to why Maruti didn't expand that market, why Jimny didn't come earlier. Is there a Kaizen learning there? I mean, you know, you are bringing the Jimny now, but
yeah,
I mean, hindsight is 20/20, of course, but as a thought.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question, but you know, it's basically more of a lifestyle vehicle. It's in the compact SUV space, and whenever you have these new segments, actually the original segment has to grow bigger. Then only sub-segments emerge.
Okay.
Like earlier somebody mentioned Maruti 800. Like Maruti 800, everybody drove the Maruti 800 in the mid-80s. Whether you are a bureaucrat or a businessman or a politician or a student or a whatever, a film star.
Yeah, it defined efficiency for most of Indians.
Exactly. But when the economy grew, you found further segmentation of the market. So you had sedans, then you had the SUVs, you had the MPVs, and so on and so forth. Similarly, in the compact SUV, new segments have emerged, we believe, where you have to see the overall volumes and then decide to bring in a car, because it has to give you scale and profits also. And that is why we have recently unveiled the Jimny, which will appeal to that sub-segment within the compact SUV segment.
So I accept, I mean, there is a principle to the market pyramid and how the higher next levels of vehicles come in, the branding and everything. So you have visibility at the entry level and you have visibility at the higher levels. So there are two questions here. One is about the economy. At the entry level, there is a belief that people may be shifting away. I mean, if you talk to two-wheeler manufacturers, they say there is a shift, very subtle shift to four-wheelers. Do you see that happening as in the Indian society? The other question is that millennials, the new generation, doesn't believe too much in ownership. That is the thesis, that their belief is more in experiences. Do you read this in the market?
Certainly, as I just mentioned, the small cars share of the overall industry has come down from about 45% 2 years back to about 35%. I mentioned that. And if you look at the absolute volumes, then at a peak, it was about 15,60,000 were the small cars. Last year, they were 11,60,000, 11,55,000. So there is a drop, definitely. But if you look at this year, financial year, the small cars will be about 13,60,000. It's a growth of 20% in the small cars.
So there's a recovery at that level.
Yeah, and we were just examining why it went down in the first place, because you know the demography supports and a growing economy. We are not a very rich economy, so we would require transportation. Public transport is not so good. Therefore, you would require, first-time buyers are very high, so about 47%. So you would require an entry-level car. And the reason why the drop happened, I believe, is because the affordability factor came down for small cars. And it is because the rise in prices of those cars were faster than the rise in income levels in that category. And the rise in price can be traced to the higher commodity prices, or it can be traced to regulatory stringency, or even to road tax and registration tax going up. But I believe once you have the economy again, money coming into the hands of that segment, you could see a revival as you are seeing this year.
So the other element that people are really excited about in the automobile space is really electrification, the EV vehicle, electric cars. Now there is an Indian player and the others have come into the market. I do know that at the expo you unveiled a new car. So how's that planning? Are you again similarly as you did in the 80s doing the backward and forward integration? Because the EV space is not simple. It is complex in terms of creating the new components, the batteries, the charging stations. So there are two parts to the question. One part is how are you planning the backward and forward integration into, are you creating new cell sites for manufacture of batteries, components and all? And how does that play into the Indian economy skill sets? And the other is, how should India look at because we are still at a very early stage, how should India look at expanding the EV market in terms of the charging stations?
Yeah, so I think that is by far the most frequent topic that's discussed in the industry. For the EVs, I think seems to be a consensus in the industry that going forward, they will become mainstream. But when they will become mainstream there is no consensus. But the question is not therefore whether, the question is when.
When.
And when we discuss the when, there are two big factors which are impeding the adoption of EVs in our country. One is the cost of the vehicle, the cost of acquisition.
Yes. So how much is the differential between, say, an internal combustion fuel engine vehicle and an electric? इस गणित को आप जरा समझाएं.
गणित ऐसी है, देखिए जनाब, कि अगर आप अलग अलग सेगमेंट में देखें तो उसमें ये जो फैक्टर है, आई मीन मुख्तलिफ सेगमेंट्स का मुख्तलिफ फैक्टर है. जैसे अगर आप हैच के बारे में अगर आप वो करें तो वो 1.6 के करीब फैक्टर है. यानी अगर 100 रुपए की गाड़ी है तो इलेक्ट्रिक 160 की होगी, 1.6 का फैक्टर है. लेकिन अगर आप सेडान या एसयूवी के हवाले से बात करें तो वो लगभग 1.4, 1.5 के लगभग जो है वो उसका फैक्टर है.
तो एक मोटा मोटी हम लोग समझ के चलें कि 100 रुपए जो पेट्रोल डीजल की गाड़ी है वो अगर इलेक्ट्रिक लें तो 150 रुपए के आसपास पड़ सकती है.
जी.
तो अगर वो 150 रुपए की पड़ती है तो उसमें लॉन्ग टर्म कब रिकवरी होती है?
जी वो उस पे भी मैं तफसील से आपको बताता हूं. एक तो यह है कि प्राइस हाई है, और यही वजह है कि अगर आप हमारे बाजार में देखें, हमारे मुल्क में पिछले साल 21,000 गाड़ियां बिकी थी, जबकि टोटल जो मार्केट था वो करीब 30.7 लाख था, करीब 0.6-0.7% मार्केट था. और इस साल भी अगर आप ये जो रवा माली साल है उसमें अगर आप उसका भी अगर आप उस हवाले से बात करें तो आप करीब 50,000 गाड़ी बिकेंगी आउट ऑफ दैट 38.7 लाख. बहुत कम है. और प्राइस मैंने बताई, और उसकी जो बुनियादी वजह है कि क्यों इलेक्ट्रिक व्हीकल्स हाई होती हैं कि कॉस्ट ऑफ बैटरी बड़ी हाई होती है, एंड दैट इज अबाउट 40-50% ऑफ द टोटल कॉस्ट ऑफ द व्हीकल. इसके लिए सुजुकी ने किया है कि बैटरी की जो लोकलाइजेशन है उसको बढ़ाने के लिए करीब 10,000 करोड़ का सरमाया अभी उन्होंने ऐलान किया है. दे हैड अनाउंस्ड 10,000 करोड़ इन्वेस्टमेंट इन द लोकलाइजेशन ऑफ बैटरी, विच शुड ब्रिंग द कॉस्ट ऑफ बैटरी डाउन, which should bring the cost of EVs down, and therefore for Maruti Suzuki it will be a competitive edge, and we unveiled our first EV last month. So
you will offer it at a lower price point and make it more competitive?
I will not like to comment on what price points we will offer, but definitely it will give us a competitive advantage. We have said that we will launch the EVX, which we unveiled in the last month in the Auto Expo. We will be launching it in the financial year 2024-25. That is our, and we have also said that we will have 6 EVs in different segments by 2030. So our estimate is that this market, which is today 1%, will be around 3% in 24-25 and will be about 17% in 2030, which is like, which is about out of 6 million, about 1 million cars will be by 2030 EVs. Now the question is, what do you do about the balance cars? From today till 2030, 43 million cars will be sold in India, estimated, out of which about 4 million will be EVs. So what happens to the balance 40 million? You need to do something about the emission, and that is why we believe we have to have a mix of technologies, and that includes CNG, biogas, hybrids, and many other technologies which people are exploring. And I believe going forward you will see that there is a mix of technology will continue, because in our country not only is the charging infrastructure deficient, the production of electricity is largely thermal, and that is not very clean. So when you look at the tailpipe emission, EVs are very clean. But when you look at what you call well-to-wheel, there is a problem. And if you look at what we call cradle-to-grave, which is what you do with batteries once they are, their life is over. So you need to look at the entire picture from cradle to grave, also well to wheel, and not just from tank to wheel. And that is the core issue, and that's why we believe we will see a mix of technologies going forward in response to the very stringent regulations regarding emissions that will surely come in our country.
One attendant question about this is that, Maruti introduced the idea of predictability, consistency, reliability in service. So when you adopt EV and you said that you expect to sort of ramp it up by 2030, what is the roadmap that you think that should be adopted in how the charging stations are established, how the infrastructure is laid out? Is Maruti got a separate view on it?
Yeah, so those are still being explored. It's an evolving field. But just for a thumb rule, for every 10 EVs, you need to have one charging station. So as I mentioned, about 4 million EVs will be sold by 2030. So we should have, by that number, 1/10, which is 400,000, should be the number of charging. At the moment, public plus private, total chargers available are 6,800. So 6,800 numbers have to go to 400,000. And that is the challenge. And as you said, there are a mix of arrangement which are being thought of. Some public chargers. There are also private players, the charging operators, where Maruti Suzuki can get in, like some companies, they will get in touch with them to aggregate and aggregate the demand, so the consumer can see where he can get the vehicle charged. But their home charging, of course, very essential in case of EVs.
Particularly rural areas and all, where you may not have the first charging stations, I think that home charging will be a
home charging anyway is important, because even if you find a charging station which is in between, it takes time to charge. So even if you have a fast charger, let's say 50 kilowatt hour charger, it will still take more than an hour to charge the vehicle. If you have a, let's say, a 7.5 kW charger, it will take about 6-7 hours to fully charge. Surely if you are going from, let's say, here to Bandra, you would not like to charge and wait for 7 hours for charging in between. So really it's home charging is very essential for that. But it has its own challenges in our country.
So at the end, I'm still trying to pin you down to whether Maruti's EV car would be a better value for money in terms of what the consumer can expect. क्या ये जो लोग इस सेशन में भाग ले रहे हैं और आगे जो इसको देखेंगे ऑन सोशल मीडिया वगैरह, उनको आप ये एश्योरेंस दे सकते हैं कि मारुति की जो ईवी व्हीकल होगी वो बेहतर तो होगी, लेकिन सस्ती भी होगी और टिकाऊ भी होगी? जैसे मारुति की क्या ब्रांड इमेज है? मारुति की इमेज है वैल्यू फॉर मनी।
जी देखिए, मैं ब्रांड के मुतालिक तो सिर्फ इतना कहूँगा कि ये इसमें तब्दीली आती है, सिर्फ रिलायबिलिटी नहीं, फंक्शनैलिटी से अब हम लोग जो हैं एस्पिरेशन की तरफ भी कोशिश कर रहे हैं और काफ़ी हद तक कामयाब भी हुए हैं। नेक्सा चैनल हमारा जो है बहुत कामयाब चैनल है, थर्ड लार्जेस्ट है आफ्टर मारुति सुजुकी एंड वन मोर प्लेयर, इट इज़ द थर्ड लार्जेस्ट। तो ब्रांड वैल्यू के मुतालिक सब लोग मेरे हिसाब से यहाँ पे जानते हैं मारुति सुजुकी को, और उसके लिए इस प्रोग्राम में यहाँ शिरकत करने की शायद ज़रूरत नहीं थी, क्योंकि ये तो बात वाज़ेह है और जाहिर है कि मारुति सुजुकी की जो गाड़ियां हैं हमेशा ही बहुत ही कॉम्पिटिटिव और वैल्यू फॉर मनी रहेंगी।
Thank you very much for being very candid and sort of giving us a sort of roadmap on where Maruti Suzuki and the EV revolution is. The numbers, some of the numbers that you mentioned on how many charging stations will be needed, sort of gives us an idea both of the challenge and the opportunity for small and medium enterprises. Thank you, Mr. Srivastava, for
शुक्रिया, थैंक यू वेरी मच।
एबीपी माझा, उघडा डोळे बघा नीट।